What's up guys, it's Matt B. I review running shoes here on YouTube, except when I don't. And when I don't, I'm usually talking about running. And today we're going to be talking about some mistakes that you should probably avoid when you're running your first marathon, or for that matter, any marathon. Because I've run quite a few marathons and I have made a lot of these mistakes well after my first one. So let's get into it. Okay, I came across an article on Outside Online and it is titled The 10 Most Common Marathon Mistakes and How to Avoid Them. So before we get started, I want to know what your next race is. And look, it doesn't have to be a marathon. If you're running a half marathon, a 10K or 5K, let me know in the comments. And if you want to get a little bit deeper, tell me how your training is going. And if you have run a marathon already, I think an extra special treat for the people reading the comments would be to hear about the mistakes that you've made in your training leading up to a marathon. Okay, let's get started off with that first mistake. And we're talking about training. Like before you get to your marathon, you have to train for it. And the first mistake is building up your mileage too quickly. And look, I don't think this is just for the new marathon runners. If you're a runner that has a little bit of experience, we can definitely fall prey to getting into a habit of building up our mileage too quickly because maybe we've done it in the past. And if you're newer and you don't have that experience, maybe you've seen some very quick results. So it's very easy to think, oh, if I do a little more, those results are going to be compounded. Guys, it's a tricky thing. It's hard to get your head around that that's not how it works. Because in the beginning, you are going to see big gains, but be very careful. And a general consensus is the 10% rule. You don't want to increase your mileage 10% week over week. But of course, that rule isn't set in stone. And if you start to feel little aches and pains, maybe it's best to back off a bit. You'll notice in a lot of training plans, you will build for a couple of weeks and then you'll take a step back week. Make sure you're taking that step back week. It gives your body time to recover. Okay, the next mistake that new marathoners make is neglecting speed work. And yeah, I've definitely been there. I think for a lot of marathons that I did in the beginning, I would just go out and I would run long, just getting that slow burn, getting those long, easy runs in. And here's the thing, when we run faster, we actually run more efficiently. So by getting in that speed work, by doing your intervals, by doing your tempo runs, and especially your marathon pace efforts, those are going to be a big part of marathon training. They actually teach you to become more efficient, so you will be more efficient on race day, and not just on race day, with all your running moving forward. The third mistake that I have definitely made is running my recovery runs too fast. And when you run your recovery runs too fast, ultimately you are not doing what you set out to do. You're not recovering. And I've also found that when I am out on a recovery run, that doesn't mean that my body is going to be feeling fantastic. So in order to gauge my recovery runs and am I actually going at a pace easy enough that is going to facilitate recovery, I look at my heart rate and I think to myself, am I able to have full conversations? That, of course, is if I'm running on my own. If I'm running with someone, I will be able to have full conversations to see if I'm running at the right pace. So just keep an eye on that. There's a time for speed and there's a time for recovery. The next mistake is prioritizing your training plan and not actually listening to how your body feels. Yes, I realize this goes against what I last said, because on my recovery runs, sometimes when I'm deep in a marathon training block, my recovery runs don't actually feel good. So if I listen to my body, I probably wouldn't do anything. But I think in this case, it's referring to your workouts, or more specifically, the harder runs of your training block. Because if you were to prioritize a training plan, instead of listening to how your body feels, let's say you start to feel little aches and pains coming in your foot, but you have an interval workout scheduled and you don't want to miss it because you don't want to get behind on that training plan. So you go out, you crush your workout, but your foot hurts just a little bit more. You have aggravated an injury by sticking to that training plan and not listening to your body. And guys, I want you to take it from me. I have done that. I've done that several times and I have aggravated injuries, and instead of taking a day or two off, I've been off for months because I just pushed it too far. I kept pushing the envelope and all of a sudden it turned around and bit me. It's not pleasant to look back and realize that you consciously made an effort to sabotage all your training. Okay, the next mistake is your training cycle is just too long. And I get that this is a tricky thing, especially if you are a new runner. And by new runner, I mean like maybe you haven't run a marathon and you're training to run your first marathon. But if you're looking through the internet and you're seeing all these different race plans, or you've hired a coach. If you've hired a coach, that's probably best because they're going to be able to design a plan specifically for you. But let's say you're looking online and you see a 12-week marathon training plan. Guys, it's very tempting to just see that plan and think, oh, I'm going to follow that and I'm going to be race ready in 12 weeks. Well, really, these shorter training plans are for more advanced runners. They may not need that much time to get in race shape. Whereas if this is your first marathon, or if you haven't been running, if you haven't been keeping that pace, you may require something like an 18-week training plan. And look, one isn't better than the other. They are just designed for different people at different stages of their running journey. And look, it's better to build up that fitness slowly. And we have to remember the old adage, it's better to be 10% undertrained than 1% overtrained. And if you do jump into a 12-week training cycle, but really an 18-week training cycle would be better for you, you are probably going to be flirting with overtraining. You're going to be putting too much too soon into your body. Okay, moving on, let's talk about race day. Let's talk about when you get to the start and you're excited and you go out too fast. Because it's incredible how easy it is to go out too fast. And I'm actually trying to think of a race that I haven't done that, and one isn't coming to mind. So yeah, I do it fairly often. I usually start too quickly. Sometimes it's not as quick as other races, but it's always too quick. Don't do that. Don't sabotage your race because you're feeling good in the beginning. The marathon is a long race. And even though it's a very compelling thought to think, oh, I'm going to bank time in the beginning of the race when I'm feeling good so I can use that time and still make my goal at the end of the race. Guys, there have been enough studies that show that that doesn't work. You cannot bank time in the beginning and use it at the end. The race is just too long. It doesn't work that way. Plus, we've got to look at the fact that all the world records in the marathon have been run at an even or a negative split, meaning you run the second half of the race faster than you run the first half. Keep that in mind. If it's a good enough race strategy for elite runners, it's probably good enough for us. The next mistake when you're actually in the race is waiting too long to fuel. Of course, when you're training, you need to be practicing your fueling. You need to be using your fuels on your run so you know how it affects you. And believe it or not, some fueling items, gels, chews, different drinks, they're going to work differently with your body. So just because your friend is using one doesn't mean it's going to work the same for you. That's why we need to practice. And of course, if you're waiting too long to fuel, it's very difficult. No, it's impossible for your body to catch up. If you're running a marathon and you've heard of hitting the wall or bonking, that's when your body runs out of glycogen and it's very difficult to continue. You can't just then pop a gel and think that's going to work its magic. It won't. You need to be fueling consistently throughout your race. You need to fuel your body for the hard work that you're putting it through. Look, these are things that you've heard. I know it. And I had heard them, and yet I still made those mistakes. But I want you to break the cycle. Don't make these mistakes. Start your fueling right away. In fact, at my last marathon, before I made this video, I actually started fueling before the race. And I don't mean breakfast. I mean, I had a gel before I started the race, just to get a jump start on my race. And it actually worked out pretty well for me. The next mistake that new marathoners make is not adjusting your race goal based on race day conditions. Look, when we're training, we have a lot of things in our control. And those things include whether we find the motivation or the discipline to get up and knock out the training that's needed to reach our potential. But there are some things that we can't change. We have some things that we have no effect over. And one of those things is the weather. So if you do have a marathon coming up, it's very likely that you have been obsessively poring over your race day weather. Now, if your race is very warm, or even if your race is very cold and it's raining, these things are going to influence your race day performance. Probably not for the better, especially in the case of heat. But look, just because the weather isn't cooperating doesn't mean you have to throw everything out. I just want you to adjust your race goals based on the race day conditions. You will feel better at the end because of it. If it's a very hot day and you go out and you try and stick to that marathon pace that you had planned, it's very likely that you're going to blow up early and your time will be much slower than if you just adjusted that race pace early on. I guess the ultimate moral of that story is just to remain flexible. And that flexibility is also in your training as well as on race day. The next mistake that new marathoners make is simply losing focus. And this is what I want you to focus on during your training. Are you going to break your race up into smaller chunks and then just run each portion of the race and then move on to the next? There's a mantra that I often repeat to myself when I'm racing a marathon, and that is to run the mile that I'm in. So I don't worry about the miles that are coming down the road. They'll get there eventually, and when they get to them, I'll focus on them. But I need to be focused on the mile that I'm in, focused on the present. Of course, if you're listening to music, that is also a way to kind of tune out. But it's important to remember that pro runners tend to focus on their bodies. They tune into what their body is doing. They recognize different feelings. They're thinking about their leg turnover. They're thinking about their arm swing. They're thinking about their breathing. And it's a whole self-analysis throughout the race. Now, maybe you think you don't want to get through a marathon without listening to music, and that's totally fine. But also pay attention to the experience that you're having. And ultimately, remain focused on the task at hand. And really, there's no sense not paying attention and staying focused because you've put in a lot of training, right? This is your day. Be present to experience it. The next mistake that new marathoners make is overestimating their fitness. So it's very likely, if this is your first marathon, that you've probably run some races of shorter distances, and then you have probably gone online and you've put that race time into a little online calculator, and it's given you your estimated marathon finish time. If you wear any kind of fitness GPS watch to track your activities, that is also probably giving you a predicted finish time. And maybe that time that is being suggested based on your past race times, maybe you don't like the way it looks. Maybe you want to run a little faster, and you actually think you can run a little faster. And I'm not saying you can't, but what I am saying is that when you're training for a marathon, it's important to put in that training where you can somewhat experience what it's going to feel like on race day. So that maybe doing a long run with some miles at marathon effort, could be running a longer tempo effort. And basically, when you get to race day, you should be very confident in how fast you can cover that distance. Of course, there's a lot of stuff outside of your control. We already talked about the weather. There are several other things, but if they're outside of your control, don't worry about it. Focus on your training, and even if you don't meet your goals, if you are confident in what you can do and you're not overestimating your ability, you are going to have a great race. And even if you don't meet your time goal, remember, if you're running a marathon, you're a very special person. Okay, I think we're going to wrap that up right now. If you do have a race coming up, let me know in the comments. If you do have your first marathon coming up, I definitely want to hear about that. But for now, it's Matt B. This has been a video on mistakes to avoid when running your first marathon, or any marathon. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.